So yeah, we have Garrett Wong here from the county to talk about the climate action plan. And yeah, take it away, Garrett. And feel free to put questions in the chat if they come up, and we'll have plenty of time for questions at the end as well.
Great. Thank you, Nadia. And thank you, everyone, for allowing me to be here today to present to you. As I mentioned before, my name is Garrett Wong. I'm the Climate Program Manager for the County of Santa Barbara. And one of my primary responsibilities is leading the county's policy as it relates to climate change. And we are hopefully nearing the last stretch of the county's development process for its next climate action plan. And we'll talk a little bit more about what's in the plan itself, and then how to get involved in the process. So like I said, we'll be talking a little bit about the background of the plan itself, how we went about going about developing it, what is in the plan, and then the opportunity for public comment. Before we get into that, though, I do want to highlight the county's One Climate Initiative. The 2030 Climate Action Plan is one plan that the county is working on, but there are several others that touch on climate change in some way. And the One Climate Initiative kind of helps bring all of these together in a way that feels hopefully a little bit more accessible to the public when it comes to messaging and outreach and engagement opportunities. But just so everyone is aware, we have an active transportation plan, and that it's actually on its way to the board, I think maybe next week, for adoption. And that's a plan that our Public Works Department has worked on. And they're primarily responsible for maintaining the public right-of-way in the unincorporated county areas. So they're looking for opportunities to expand the biking network, as well as walking infrastructure to make sure that it's safe, accessible, and comfortable, to try and promote people taking those modes instead of driving themselves in their cars. A lot of people, I'm sure, are aware of the housing element that the county is working on, and that is trying to increase the amount of accessible and affordable housing in our region, which will also affect climate change, hopefully by reducing the length that people would have to drive in order to get to where they need to go. Two other projects that are happening right now. One is the safety element update and the climate change adaptation plan. So the safety element is also a component of the county's general plan and looks at different potential impacts that could affect community safety, and climate change is one of those. And so we're looking into the future and trying to figure out what impacts we need to be best prepared for, and how can we either mitigate the impact itself, or the risk involved, or the adaptive capacity of whether it's infrastructure or people. The climate change adaptation plan will kind of go beyond the safety element update into more proactive programs and projects that could be implemented outside of kind of zoning and kind of plan related activities. And then finally, a new element will be introduced into the county's general plan, which is called the environmental justice element. This is particularly focused on communities that have been historically underinvested, or are exposed to a greater extent to sources of pollution, or maybe don't have similar access to healthy sources of food or green spaces and things like that. So this, the environmental justice element looks at the conditions of these particular communities in the unincorporated county, and hopes to identify ways in which the county can rectify some of those injustices. So these are all projects that are happening right now, and not just being led by one department. There's 3 departments involved here across all these different plans. So hopefully you could find something that's interesting for you, but also see how they intersect. Today we're focusing primarily on the county's climate action plan. And for those who aren't as familiar, a climate action plan is a high-level document. It's kind of a wish list or to-do list It contains policies, programs, and projects that are trying to reduce carbon emissions from various sources in our community. The Board of Supervisors has adopted a goal to try and reduce our community-wide emissions 50% by the year 2030, which is a fairly tall order given the short amount of time that's left ahead of us. One thing to keep in mind is that when we adopt the Climate Action Plan, it doesn't automatically or immediately enact any policy that's in there. Like I said, it's a to-do list. And a lot of these ideas in the Climate Action Plan have their full life cycle ahead of them when it comes to the development process and approval from the board, further approval from the board if needed. And then there may be elements of funding and staffing that need to get introduced. And so the Climate Action Plan is really the kind of the beginning of the process to just kickstart a lot of these ideas, but ultimately, having an adopted Climate Action Plan does not cause any policy in there to immediately become effective. So that's one thing to keep in mind. So our emissions in the unincorporated area come from a variety of sources, and a lot of them you're mostly familiar with, primarily transportation, both commercial and residential vehicles, people commuting to where they need to go to work. There's also off-road equipment that's included, tractors and construction equipment. The next largest portion of carbon emission sources are our buildings, and that's in the green area at the bottom right. The electricity that we use, some of it is sourced from sources of energy that do have some carbon footprint to them, and then we have natural gas use in buildings that represents a much larger source of carbon emissions in buildings. The next largest source of carbon emissions after building related energy is agriculture, and then solid waste, the waste that we throw away in the landfills, and as it decomposes generates methane. So when we do this, it's called a greenhouse gas emissions inventory. It's basically a snapshot of where our sources are, and we try and look at it relative to prior years and use it to kind of forecast into future years, and then use this information to determine where do we need to be most active when it comes to reducing sources of carbon emissions. We started this process several years ago, back in late 2020, and we had a lot of community outreach in a lot of different formats. We did listening sessions, we stood up an equity advisory outreach committee, we've had workshops, we did public, we produced a video, and we've provided the community a number of opportunities to provide input and ideas, and also provide feedback on kind of draft ideas that we've had. And we're, like I said, nearing kind of the tail end of this process, where we're soon to be releasing the environmental impact report. The draft Climate Action Plan has already been released, and we're hoping to adopt our plan before the end of the year so that we can start implementing. The plan has 6 focus areas. You can see them listed here. And within each focus area, there are measures, and then within each measure, there are goals that we are trying to achieve in order to meet our carbon emission reduction goals. And then each focus area and measure also has a list of actions, and the actions, like I said previously, could be policies, they could be programs or projects like infrastructure projects, or maybe there are new partnerships working with different types of organizations to implement an activity. We try and look at ways in which these actions are affecting either more significant like structural change, whether it's a policy or paradigm shift of sorts. We also want to make sure that we're providing education opportunities because information, education, and awareness are important to adoption and acceptance of certain technology or behavior change. And we also want to be cognizant of the equity impact of what we're doing. We don't want to exacerbate inequity. We want to make sure that we're prioritizing communities that have been historically under-resourced and underinvested when it comes to these types of programs and policies and projects. Everything that we're doing here will require funding in some way, shape, or form, whether it's the county's general fund or whether it's other sources of funding, external state funding or grants and things like that. And then everything that we do will not be done by the county itself alone. We have to do a lot of this work in partnership. And of course, some of the work that we'll do will require feasibility studies, making sure that we're considering kind of the full scale of impact of what we're doing and considering the stakeholders involved. So we're going to kind of step into these different focus areas, starting with housing and transportation, and then we're going to touch on the high level goals and objectives, but not really yet we're not going to get into the weeds with the actions, but happy to do so if anyone wants to ask a question or provide a comment on them later on. So with housing and transportation, kind of the two big shifts really are to try and increase as much affordable housing as possible, making sure that people don't have to drive, like I said, as far when it comes to where they work or where they go to school. And then for all the vehicles that are still going on the road, we need to try and get them to be as many to be as zero emission as possible, as soon as quick as possible. So a mixture of incentives and infrastructure and kind of supportive programs are necessary to kind of make sure that we're accelerating the pace at which the vehicle turnover is happening. Off-road emissions will be a tougher challenge for us since the technology is still evolving in this space, and just making sure that there's viable alternatives for this larger, medium, and heavy-duty type of equipment. When it comes to clean energy, our utility grid is is on its way to becoming 100% powered by renewable energy. And so the utility grid, electric grid, becomes a vehicle for transforming the building stock to being essentially carbon free, if we're able to eliminate the use of natural gas in buildings. We were intending to do a policy for new construction. We're kind of putting a pause on that for a moment, as there's a court case involved at the moment. But there are programs available now that can help residents and commercial buildings start to electrify some of their end uses, like a furnace or like a water heater. There are programs available to help people to convert those systems over to all electric. When it comes to waste, water and wastewater, we're trying to reduce the amount of waste that's getting sent to the landfill, particularly valuable material like organic material that can be turned into compost and put back into the organic cycle. Trying to reduce non-recyclable, non-compostable single-use items, and then also trying to make our water system, the system that from which we pump and treat and move our water, trying to make that as energy and carbon efficient as possible. There's 3 focus areas all in one slide here, so we'll take them one at a time. So when it comes to nature-based solutions, we recognize the county has a lot of natural and working lands, and with the right incentives in place, the right programs in place, we can help to promote land stewardship that helps to draw down carbon from the atmosphere, put it into plants and trees and into the soil and increase soil health. And the county also has the ability to plant trees, whether it's in our parks or in our public right-of-way. So we're wanting to utilize nature as much as possible as well. And we also recognize when it comes to our low carbon economy, as we're transitioning away from fossil fuels, that potentially our local industries might be impacted, and that the people and the communities that that live off of those industries will also be impacted. And so it's necessary to think about what does that transition look like if there are changes in the industry and there are livelihoods at stake? We need to be more thoughtful, more collaborative, and make sure that there are alternatives and solutions to making sure that people are able to find viable work if they're leaving the industry. We also need to think about carbon sequestration. We recognize that we may not be able to reduce all the carbon emissions, but there could be opportunities to support and fund projects that draw down carbon, like I previously mentioned. We don't necessarily have mechanisms to do that right now. So we're trying to make sure that we have the capacity to do so, that we have identifying funding to do so, and that we're able to connect with the projects on the ground, value the amount of carbon that they're pulling out of the atmosphere, and to be able to pay them for that value. When it comes to municipal operations, this is the area in which the county has the most control over our own buildings and over our own vehicles. We're doing a lot in this area already, but wanting to continue to expand the use of renewable energy and battery storage to make our facilities more energy resilient, and making sure that our vehicle fleet is continuing to become more less fossil fuel intensive as well. So if we look at our emissions going into the future, that's this first column, there will potentially be emissions growth, considering all the population and economic growth that we're anticipating in the future. But we also know that there are programs and legislation in place at the state level that will continue to either mitigate or reduce that emissions growth. And that's what that gray bar represents. And hopefully, if we implement to the fullest extent all the programs and policies and projects that are in the climate action plan within these various focus areas, you'll see that they put a downward pressure on our emissions going into the future, and hopefully we'll get close to half of where we need to be, or sorry, get close to half of our 2018 kind of levels, but not quite. And so we need to consider how aggressively do we want to push towards that goal. What is the political costs? What is the financial cost associated with that? And is it technically feasible to do so, given again the short amount of time that we have, or all the alternatives we want to explore, like carbon offsets? So those are some things that we need to have the Board of Supervisors kind of provide some feedback on. Our hope is that we'll be going back to the board for some feedback before the end of June, and get some directions there. Like I mentioned, the draft climate action plan is available for public comment. We released it in late February and had a couple workshops. There's a recorded workshop on the website at countyofsb.org/oneclimate. You'll mostly hear the same thing that I already just spoke about just now, but that's available for viewing. And we have a website also for the plan itself for you to review. It's at this Conveo site. And here you can actually scroll through the document on the web page, and then you can tap anywhere on the document, and it'll prompt you to write some information. And it's basically like directly commenting onto the document, and you can see where other community members have commented on the document as well. So you can also have a reaction to previous comments, or just give a thumbs up or thumbs down to comments that have been done prior, to help create, and it helps create like a more nuanced conversation between community members. So we invite you to participate in public comment through that way. And like I said, hopefully through the end of June, we'll keep public comment open. It's a fairly extensive public comment period. We'll also be working on our environmental impact report, and that will also have its own public comment period. And once that concludes, then we will close out the public comment period for the cap itself. And that is it for my slides. So happy to take any questions or comments from folks if you have them. Also happy to correspond with anyone offline outside of the meeting, and I will leave my email. But again, would invite you to participate in the public comments on the website, and then and continue to stay engaged as we move through the adoption process. So thank you.
Thanks so much, Garrett. I see Dick has joined us. Dick, do you want to take over, or do you want me to keep on moderating? I'm happy either way.
I was hoping you'd keep on.
Okay, great. So I see a raised hand from Catherine and then Hal. So go ahead, Catherine.
Just a question for Garrett. First of all, fantastic presentation, very informative. But I just had a question. You had mentioned that the county had put on pause the new building electrification codes because of a lawsuit. Is that the city of Berkeley case?
That is.
Okay, perfect. Just wanted to make sure all my ducks were in a row. Thank you.
Hal, go ahead.
Garrett, I have two questions for you. One is, I think you're very much aware that the Inflation Reduction Act is making grants available to reduce emissions and reach our goals. I think both the county and 3CE would be eligible to get those grants. So my first question is, what is the county doing to facilitate that? And my second question is the county doing anything to encourage companies to come to the North County and use abandoned oil wells for carbon sequestration? Back to you, Garrett.
Great. Thanks, Al. So the first question, yes, there's a lot of grant funding that's coming available and that will become available in the near future. So we're doing a lot of strategizing, a lot of talking with other organizations, jurisdictions, agencies to try and figure out the best way to apply for a lot of the funding. Some funding is, allocated to large metropolitan areas, and then we're not eligible to get some of that. And then some of it is open for competitive grants. And so we are thinking about where's the best place for us to focus our time and energy. You mentioned 3CE. So yes, they're also going to be looking at similar opportunities and figuring out what best applies for them. And then we also have the Tri-County Regional Energy Network, which is somewhat of a complementary program to 3CE. So the Tri-County Regional Energy Network provides energy efficiency and electrification programs to residents and businesses. And they are also going to be looking at those funding opportunities. So there's state dollars, and then there's also federal dollars that we're considering. So yes, trying to think about how much we can do in the little amount of time that these grants are coming out of us. It feels like we're kind of drinking from the fire hose at this point, because there's just a lot of movement happening, but it's a very exciting time. As far as the carbon sequestration goes, I've only heard that there was some interest actually coming from the supervisor's office. I think they've been approached by some businesses, but as far as a particular place or particular company or technology, I haven't heard anything more specific other than that. So I think there is interest. I don't know yet who's going to have to make the first move, whether it's a property owner themselves or one of the operators who's interested in utilizing an inactive well, or there could be grant funding for potential kind of pilot project to be developed in partnership, across different types of organizations. Another one I'll kind of mention vaguely is that there's another company that is based up in the North County. They're exploring the use of algae to basically consume the carbon emissions that are being produced from an industrial process. And then that would create a feedstock that could be given to cattle, and cattle could consume that feedstock, and then they could actually have less gastrointestinal activity that would result in less carbon intensive belching and farts. So there's one that I'm familiar with, and they're also seeking some federal funding to try and do that here in Santa Barbara County. So that could be an exciting opportunity.
That's good news. Thank you very much for the comprehensive answer, Garrett.
Yeah, thank you. Anyone else have any other questions or comments for Garrett?
Well, I can jump in. Speaking
Please.
just like an ordinary citizen, there's several things that I've heard I should be thinking about doing in my life that touch on what you're talking about. And the most, to me, confusing is disposing of food waste and what we're supposed to do about that. And then more, should I be thinking about replacing my gas stove and gas heater with electricity? And what are the incentives around that? And what about I have solar panels, should I get battery? See what I'm saying? I would like to know.
There's a lot.
I'm a fairly well-informed guy, and I don't really know what the paths are for those kinds of activities.
Yeah. Can I ask in what area do you live?
From the city, from Santa Barbara.
Okay, all right. Yes, because the response is different when it comes to composting. It all depends on what community you're living in and who's your waste hauler and where the waste is going. So for the South Coast region, all of the waste that gets collected by Marburg is sent to the Tehiquis landfill, which is out on the Gaviota Coast. There's a new facility out there. It's about a couple of years old now. But that facility has what's called an MRF, or a materials recovery facility. And they're mechanically and physically separating organic material as well as recyclable material, and making sure that that's not going into the landfill anymore. What's cool about that facility is that the compostable material is getting put into anaerobic digesters, which is basically almost like a vacuum sealed room, where it's broken down into smaller biomass. The methane that comes out of that process is captured, and then it's being combusted on site to generate electricity for that whole facility. And then there's compost that's being created out of that process, and then it's actually getting redistributed either out on local agricultural fields, or it could also potentially be resold as compost in bags and kind of at a retail site.
So the individual customer doesn't have to separate food
for
waste.
People who are living in the South Coast.
Yeah, they don't.
Yeah. For people who are like up in Santa Ynez area, it's a different system. It's waste management that's serving those communities, and it goes to a different facility. And so separating your organics, particularly from the kitchen, is important. Putting it in a separate bin, so that way it's not contaminating the waste stream or the recycling stream. The county has been distributing kind of those kitchen composting pails. So hopefully you've gotten one of those, but if you haven't, you can also let me know. On your second question, yes, we are trying to encourage people to consider going to all electric appliances. If you're interested and you're feeling ready to commit to that, please, you can reach out to me and I can connect you with the right people who can get you started. There are lots of incentives available for water heaters, for furnace replacements, and for electric ranges.
So my point, though, is that you have to be proactively seeking the information out, which I don't think is optimal. I would think there should be more general knowledge about everything you just mentioned. What are the incentives? What's the urgency for doing that? So on. right?
Agreed. Yeah, outreach and education is always a challenge for a public agency. We need partners like you all who have stronger connections or maybe more vast connections in the community to distribute information. So to the extent that SBCAN wants to be an outreach partner, we can consider kind of providing a lot of the information and materials that we have, make sure that people are aware of what resources are available.
Yeah, great. Yeah, we'd love to pass things on to our members, and it's in part why we're having this meeting now. And yeah, Ken, go ahead.
I don't really want to belabor Dick's point or question that much, but I'm still confused. And I live in Orchid, and I know where to put the food waste, which goes in with the green waste, and I know what's recyclable, I think. And then the trash there's just a very little bit of stuff that's left over that goes into the actual trash can. But one question is, there's 7 different types of plastic, and I think here they take, if it's one with the little triangle and it's got a 1, it's peat. That's recyclable for sure, but the rest of it, I get mixed signals, and I got to find the right source here to know. So far, I'm just putting number 1 in the recycle bin, and the other stuff I'm compiling, and I'll take it to a recycle center. But if I was on South Coast, it's not clear to me. I thought I heard at first, Garrett, that you throw the food waste and everything just goes in one thing together, and then it all gets separated. But then you talked about a food waste, a separate thing.
Right, it's because different communities are being served by different waste haulers, and then the waste is also going to different facilities, which all are kind of different in their capability to separate. So,
but if it's going to Tahigos,
for South Coast residents, it is.
So do you separate your food waste at all? You said something about a food waste container so it won't contaminate other stuff.
For communities that are in the Santa Ynez Valley
Okay.
region. So yes, Orchid, you will have to separate.
But Dick Flax living in the city can throw all his stuff into one bin, right?
Correct. It would be helpful if it was separated, but it's not necessary.
And if you wanted to separate it, how would you do that?
So if you're in the kitchen and you're cutting your vegetables and fruits, you should have like a small container to kind of catch all the pieces that you're not going to consume. And then you would put that into, if you have a green bin, then that would be a place to put it at the end of the day. Or you can compost it. There's 2 types of composting systems that people can have at home. One is, more for like a backyard arrangement. So if you have space for that, then that's one way to do it. And you kind of mix it with, stuff that you would pull out from your yard, like leaves, or you could put more other kind of brown material like newspaper. And then you start mixing it, and that's the aerobic kind of composting process. Turn it over. It's good for your garden. And then the other kind of more smaller form factor when it comes to taking care of that kitchen waste would be worms. They're incredibly effective at decomposing organic material, and it doesn't take a lot of space. Kind of like a small plastic kind of tote container would contain them, and they make special ones where they call the compost tea. There's a lot of moisture in there, so the compost tea drips down through a little grate, and then that's also really potent stuff that can help your plants grow a lot more healthier without kind of artificial chemical fertilizers. So there's different ways to kind of take care of the organic waste if you want to do it within your home or if you want to send it out.
Thank you.
But in the city, you should not put food waste in the green bin in the city of Santa Barbara, right? That's only for leaves and stuff like that. And then there's this website called lessismore.org that has because every year what's recyclable changes, and it's different in every county and every community because it depends on where there's a market for it. So if you have a question about a specific type of plastic or something like that, you can always look on there. Yeah. Well, great. Any other final questions or anything else you want to say, Garrett? Oh, Sandy,
Looks
go
like
ahead.
Sandy. Unmute yourself, Sandy.
Sandy, you're on mute.
Hi, Garrett. How are you doing? Nice
Good.
to hear your talk again. I just wanted to mention that the facility that we live in, it's a retirement facility, has come up with a food waste program that's really working well. We have about 189 residents here, and there are
Close to 40.
places where they can bring their trash, but we have enticed people now to put their food waste into a plastic bin and put this outside their door when it's filled, and staff will come and pick it up and then throw it into the yellow bins, which then get picked up by Marlboro. And so that's a way that multi-use facilities could work, and if they have the support of their management. I didn't have a question. I just wanted to let you know that's one of the ways in which you can collect and have people agree to put their food waste out instead of throwing it in the trash.
Great. Well, thank you everyone for your time. Thank you for the questions and the comments. Like I said, please visit the website to look at the draft climate action plan, or please look at the website to find the other plans within the One Climate Initiative that they mentioned. And if anyone has any other further questions or comments they want to send me directly, please feel free to reach out.
Thanks so much, Garrett.
Thank you.
Okay, great. So we're going to now move on to the Exxon conversation of the different various projects that ExxonMobil and other oil companies are trying to, what they're trying to do in Santa Barbara County. And we have an exciting update from just this Wednesday. So I'll talk a little bit about this, and then Ken, feel free to jump in. And if people have questions, again, you can use the raise hand feature or put it into the chat. So this Wednesday, the Planning Commission voted to deny the valve upgrade project. So this was an attempt of Exxon to upgrade safety valves and put in new safety valves on the existing Plains All-American pipeline. And that pipeline is not active. It has not been active since the oil spill in 2015 that caused the Refugio oil spill. And since then, the pipeline has become badly corroded. There's a lot of issues with it. There's been no oil flowing in it since 2015. And they actually have an application in at the county to build a new pipeline, a replacement pipeline, that is taking a long time to go through the process. But there's a state law that requires pipelines to have these additional safety valves. So that's basically what they said that they were doing. They're just applying to have the best available safety technology, which of course, in theory, we would appreciate and want to support. But the only reason they would want to do that is so that they could restart this existing pipeline, which is something we don't want to see happen. So anyway, they ended up denying that, and that was the outcome that we were hoping for. So that was really great. And there was a whole coalition of people involved, not just SBCAN. But yeah, so that was a great thing to celebrate from this Wednesday. These projects they span years and years. So it's good to take stock of the wins along the way. And next up for that, Exxon will likely appeal it to the Board of Supervisors. So we'll be sure to keep everyone updated about that. Also, last year, you might remember the Board of Supervisors denied ExxonMobil's trucking project. They wanted to truck oil 140 truck trips per day along like the 166. And yeah, it was just not a great plan. They wanted to do that while they were waiting for the new pipeline to be built. The board ended up denying that, and SBCAN worked on that as well. And Exxon is currently suing the county over the decision, and EDC, the Environmental Defense Center, is representing SBCAN on that case. They've intervened on that, and I don't think we have any big updates on that other than it's going forward, and we will let you know when there's opportunity for the public to participate. And then lastly, in the midst of all of this, so Exxon purchased the pipeline from Plains. So now Exxon's the owner of the pipeline. And then they sold the pipeline and all of their oil infrastructure. So the offshore sites and the pump stations and everything that they own, they've sold to Sable, which is a brand new company, or I don't know if it's brand new, but no one really knows anything about it. And it seems, yeah, there's just not a lot of information available. It seems like a very small company. They've kind of come out of nowhere. And changes of ownership for onshore oil facilities and offshore oil facilities need to be approved by the county. But the county's never gone through this process since they made that rule. So the county attempted to sort of, or they did approve the change of ownership, but EDC, again, on behalf of SBCAN, has intervened on that and is appealing that because we don't think that this new company no one knows anything about is going to be responsible necessarily, or they should at least have to prove that they would, and if there was an oil spill that they would be able to deal with it, and the county wouldn't be left having to deal with the repercussions. So that hearing will be before the Planning Commission, and that will be sometime this summer. It was going to be in June, but they had to reschedule it, so I'm not sure exactly when that will be yet. And we received a grant from the fund for Santa Barbara to do this work with EDC. So thank you to the fund. And yeah, those are all the Exxon things. Ken, do you want to add anything about that?
That was pretty thorough. The approval of the ownership change was done by the zoning administrator.
Yes, yeah.
And it was done on the same day that comments were due. And so we had comments on it, and they approved it before they could possibly have had time to read the comments or respond to them.
Right.
I don't know, it's like they didn't think we were paying attention or something, but when you have EDC on your team, that's a mistake. They're always paying close attention.
Is there a hand up function going?
Oh, go ahead, Pam.
Okay, I want to be sure that you all know that the 16th of May, the League of Women Voters is holding a forum at Direct Relief at noon, and we'll be showing the film Broke, which is about the 2015 oil spill. And we also will follow around 1 o'clock, we should have a panel. And I was trying to look up who's going to be on the panel, and I haven't found that email yet, but we're putting that together. And Gail Osharenko, who was the producer of the film Broke, is organizing the forum. So I think we'll have some good speakers. So if you want to keep up with this topic, y'all come. You're welcome to come.
Thank you for bringing that up, Pam. And SBCAN is a co-sponsor of the event.
Yes. Yeah.
And I know that Linda Kropp is one of the people that's going to speak. Linda's with EDC. And I've seen the film years ago, and it's powerful. And it's a good time to look at it again and have some discussion about it, because this stuff isn't going away.
No, it's not.
Yep. Yeah, thanks, Pam. Go ahead, Sandy.
I just want to add to Pam's just that there'll be flyers about this forum at the Earth Day booths. The League of Women Voters will have a booth as a long folder and you can't see it too well, but it shows who the sponsors are. And like I said, you have Linda Robb, you have John Zurowicz from the Santa Barbara County Planning and Development Department, Anna Citron, who's the attorney for the Gaviota Coast Conservancy. We invited someone from Exxon, but they have not yet confirmed whether they're going to come.
Great.
Stop by the Earth EDC or the League of Women Voters, and you can get a flyer about this forum that's happening on May 16th.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and Earth Day is this weekend, the CEC Earth Day Festival, and Ken will be on a panel at 2 on Saturday talking about North County things. I don't know exactly if you want to say more about that, Ken, or if you know what it'll be about, but and then on Sunday I'll be part of a discussion from 10 to noon, and then there'll be some other exciting things at 2. Jane Fonda is presenting the awards, the climate awards, and then at 3:30 there's going to be an exciting panel also with some local environmental justice leaders. So lots going on this weekend.
And the title of what I'm speaking on tomorrow at 2, it's a history of North County environmental injustice and community organizing.
Great.
And my part of it is historic oil development and uncapped oil wells. And I'll figure out this afternoon what I'm going to say.
Okay, great. Well, I want to make sure we have time for both the Santa Maria River Healthy Watershed update and to hear from Monique Lamone's staff about the bill. So I'll turn it over now to Jeannie to talk about the Healthy Watershed, maybe for 15-ish minutes, if that works, and then we'll okay, great. Go ahead, Jeannie.
There's plenty of time and probably not even that much.
Okay, perfect.
Hi, I'm Jeannie Sparks, and I'm Associate Director of Santa Barbara County Action Network. We're working in conjunction with Creeklands Conservation and other groups to work on watershed issues. And mainly the long-term goal is to develop a group of folks who are concerned and want to be active, excuse me, in watershed issues relating to the Santa Maria Valley or the Santa Maria River watershed. So I just want to give you an update on where we are with that. This is something we just began really working in January. So I'm going to share my screen and talk about a couple of things. Let's see where it's, there we go. So this is a map of the watershed. Can everybody see this? Okay, so our watershed goes all the way out to Ventura County with headwaters out here with Alamo Creek. We have another Alamo Creek, which is over here in San Luis Obispo County, which I thought was really interesting. Just a little bit in Kern County, mostly it's Santa Barbara and San Luis Obispo counties. The Sisquoc River is a wild and free river. It flows to this point where it becomes the Santa Maria River. Cuyama River flows here into Twitchell Reservoir. There's a dam right there. And then it comes down and it joins the Sisquoc. And when they join here, they change their name to the Santa Maria River. So that's our main watershed, everything that supplies those two rivers that become the Santa Maria River. We have been working, our original idea was to go to the estuary at Guadalupe Beach, Rancho Guadalupe Preserve, they call it. And we were going to do that in January. We had an online training. And then our next thing was to go out there to the estuary and do water quality testing. Well, this is what it looked like in January after the big rains. And you can see, this is the entrance right here. You can see this little gate, just barely see it. And then the road goes like this, and then it is flooded. And so there was no way to access the estuary, which is out here. So since January, we've been looking for alternatives. This is January also looking upstream. Here's the entrance, looking upstream of the river. Generally, the river runs out here, but this year it decided to run this way. And Guadalupe, the Public Works Director in Guadalupe, is looking at alternatives to hopefully keep the river out in this direction. 9 homes got flooded in Guadalupe this year, and she wants to prevent that from happening again. This is where the estuary is actually meets the ocean. Usually there's a sandbar here, but because there was enough water, it broke through, and this is where you have the possibility of steelhead coming upstream. This is just a little bit closer picture of that. Now, this is again January to show you over here the Sisquoc River, the Orchid Sisquoc River, Orchid Solomon Creek comes in right over here along the edge of the hill and beyond. And it comes, and that's where it meets with the Santa Maria River. Could meet a little bit further inland if it wasn't going that different direction this year. But here again is the gate. This is January. So this is 2 weeks ago. Here's this gate that we were just talking about. Now the Santa Maria River has decided it's really going to go this way. So it has wiped out the road to Guadalupe. Just happened. This is where you see Orchid Creek coming in. And this is what you see if you walk to the end of the road. You see the entrance to the park, and there's, it was impassable before, it's impossible now. This is some of the land downstream of that gate that has been washed out. You can see the ag field has lost a lot of soil. This pipe here is what they call tiling. This is a pipe with holes in it that they use to drain off the water in fields that go all the way far east of here. And I'll show you some of those in a minute. Don't know what this pipe is, but it looks pretty important and it's now exposed. Okay, this is what's called Guadalupe Lake, and this is just east of Guadalupe. And this land that you see flooded here is generally farmed. So this year, with all the water that we got, it became what it has been in years past before they put tiling in and before we had all these droughts. It's decided to become a lake again, or a lagoon. So on some maps, it's listed as a lagoon, but Guadalupe Lake, it's listed as quite often. And so this is showing that going downstream, this is a little bit closer up picture, the sugar factory is over here, the closed down sugar factory. This is an aerial view of the same area. Over here's the sugar factory, and it comes and it loops around, makes a V shape, comes over this way. These were all farm fields and will be again once it dries up. This is Laguna Sanitation settling ponds. And Laguna Sanitation has something, I think it's right here. Just some other views of the same thing. In the middle, Laguna Sanitation waters this area, and a rancher has his cattle. We can see him over here right now that feed off of that. The Sisquoc River drainage. This is all Sisquoc River drainage here. Orchid Solomon Creek. Keep saying Sisquoc, not Sisquoc. Orchid Solomon Creek. This is all its drainage area. And this is a sugar factory over here. Just different views. This is Laguna San again. So this is looking downstream from the sugar factory here, and there's that V shape I was telling you about. So just some different views. You can see the cattle, beautiful, beautiful land. This is a view of Santa Maria River from Bull Canyon crossing, and you can see 101 crossing over here. Lovely to see water going through there. Another view of it. Here's it from being up closer, Bull Canyon again. Wow, water, yay. Still Bull Canyon, but looking upstream. Now this is 101 looking downstream. 101 looking upstream. Nice to see water. And this is on the Sisquoc River farther upstream. This is at Santa Mesa Road overcrossing. And here's the Twitchell Dam, actually water in the Twitchell Dam. This is the actual dam right here. This is something like I don't know what they're doing there, but they've got some activity there. You can see this from the roadside. This is the crossing over the road. You've probably seen it at one point. This is Alamo Creek that I pointed out in the map earlier. Looking upstream, the Alamo Creek that's in San Luis Obispo County, not the other one. And this is Alamo Creek looking downstream, and it goes around here. And that dam I just pointed out is back behind that hill. So, and there's the watershed. So that's the end of my pictures. Let me get off the sharing screen. Stop share. So where we are right now is trying to figure out what to do next. We're trying to find other ways to access the estuary, because that's really where we can do some testing on a year-round basis. If we could get to it, the water, elsewhere tends to go away. And it's really hard to do any testing otherwise. But we're thinking maybe the next thing is if we can access that from the Unocal remediation site, or another possibility just to keep our project moving is to do some watershed education. City of Guadalupe is really interested in doing something like that. We might host it there. But that's where we are right now. We're looking for people who are interested in being involved. If you are, sign up at sbcan.org. We have a sign up page. It says Clean Water Team. And that's about it. That's just wanted to give a brief update. If there's any questions, happy to answer them.
I would add that Jeannie's been telling me about this Guadalupe Lake for years, and I kind of believed her, but I figured I'll never see it. Well, there it is. I mean, we could see it from the side of the road easily, and it's pretty. And with her drone, she can see it so much better. How many drones did it take to get all these pictures?
Yeah, well, I lost my first drone because I didn't have my reading glasses on. I hit the wrong buttons and I made it land when it's supposed to come back to me. And so it landed in the Santa Maria River. I don't think I'm going to see that one again. Sandra?
It's nice to see all that water also. I'm just wondering, what do you expect is going to happen with the snow melt from the Sierras? They're anticipating large areas of flooding in the middle of California. Have you evaluated what might happen with your watershed area?
I don't know how much snowpack we have that's upstream. It's I'm really not familiar with that. I haven't talked to anybody who really knows. Just I've had people say, I don't think there's much snow up there, but I don't know. Maybe somebody on this call knows more than I do. I haven't thought about asking Creeklands Conservation about that, so I don't know. Anybody here have an answer for that?
Well, I mean, you and I have been out there, and the Sisquoc is not flowing as fast as it was, 6 weeks ago. So it's going down. There is probably still some snow melting up on Pine Mountain and in the Dick Smith Wilderness and so forth. But, it never was all that deep. It's nothing like the snowpack in the Sierra Nevada that have got people so worried about getting flooded out.
And what about on the Cuyama River? Is there anything there?
I don't think so. I don't think that's that significant.
One of the issues this year that people are talking about is whether the releases from Twitchell caused that flooding in Guadalupe, and whether it could have been done differently. At one point, they released as much as 2,500 cubic feet per inch per second. Cubic feet per second. Yeah, 2,500 cubic feet per second. Right now, I think, the last time I looked, which was a week or two ago, it was 200 cubic feet per second. So that's quite a big difference. So that 2,500 could have contributed to that damage I showed. And there's a lot of question as to whether it really needs to be released that quickly on the schedule that it is. But and I think that's one of the questions we'll explore to try to reduce flooding in the future. And also, what's happening is there has been, and it still is, a lawsuit to get the dam to release water at a certain time to promote the ability of steelhead to swim upstream. And that lawsuit, the first court case was won by the water district, and they were not required to release it. And the second case was won by the environmentalists. And now there's an appeal on that one. So we'll see what happens with that. But EDC and Forest Watch, Los Padres Forest Watch, I think that's the name of it, right? Los Padres Forest Watch are the litigants in that. The Santa Maria Valley Water Conservation District and the Bureau of Reclamation are the defendants, and we'll see how that goes. It would really be nice, I think, it's just changing of a schedule of like 4% of when 4% of the water as to when it's released could really help improve the chances of steelhead to swim upstream. Right now, what Twitchell does is releases the water just for recharge and for flood control as required. They're required to release it for flood control when it gets to 623 feet. But they release it slowly during the summer to recharge the groundwater basin. So if they were to change supposedly 44%, apparently 4% of what they've released at a different time, it will really help for steelhead.
It was, I was surprised to see so much release at that time. And when it gets a little over half full, I think it's up to 60% or so, then it's the federal, the Bureau of Reclamation, is that right? They're in charge of a flood control. So they don't want it to get too full for fear that there'll be another huge rain and it'll get up to the top, and then there'll be huge flooding, and it would be beyond a few houses in Guadalupe, but could be as it happened in the past before the dam and the levees flooding Santa Maria. But it sure seemed to me like that they could have stored a lot more water, because we can use it in the summer to recharge our groundwater basin that we rely on so much for drinking water and for the farms.
Yeah, and the one thing that was brought up to me today by Creeklands Conservation is there might be another issue too. It might be how much pressure you can put on that dam before it would fail. So maybe they can't really have more. I don't know, but we don't know. That's something that maybe at a public meeting, we could have them come and we could have a conversation about why they're so restricted, so strict about when they have to release that water.
And so those vehicles that you had a picture of that were right on the side of the dam, maybe they're doing something about that. I wouldn't like to see that dam fail.
Yeah, I really don't know. I mean, that's just a possibility. So I'm not sure if that's what the case is at all. Could be something else. Well, it doesn't seem like there's any other questions, so I think we should move on to our next topic. I hope any of you who are interested, please sign up. Nadia has put the link in the chat. Thank you, Nadia.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you, Jeannie. And yeah, we'll go to our final topic from Samantha.
Hi, everyone. So I'm here to talk to you about one of Senator Lamone's bills, fondly known as the Labor Force Housing Financing Act. So just as a high level, this bill will levy an assessment on short-term rentals, kind of like a TOT, kind of like a transit occupancy tax. It's separate and distinct from a transit occupancy tax, but it functions in a very similar way. And so what this funding would do is it would go and be a dedicated funding source for affordable housing, particularly affordable housing that's like publicly owned or owned by nonprofits, not by developers, but by entities like a housing authority or housing nonprofit that will keep it deeded, like deed restricted as affordable housing into the future. And so I'm happy to give kind of a little bit of an update on what's happened with this bill the last couple of weeks. But I don't know, Dick, if you had any like particular questions you wanted me to hit. Like, I'm happy to talk about it.
Well, no, go ahead and
Okay.
give us the update. But one question I had that maybe you know the answer somewhat. I want to talk about that revenue source, so we will save that for after.
Okay.
Okay.
Yep, sounds good. So the last couple of weeks, this bill has been heard in two separate committees. We were heard in the Housing Committee and the Governance and Finance Committee. It passed out of both. It did take some amendments in Governance and Finance a couple days ago. And so the amendments kind of restructured how the tax will be, or how the assessment will be collected. But that was kind of a more technical thing, so it doesn't go through housing and community development. It'll actually go through the California Department of Tax and Fee Administration. The other two really important amendments is it sets a de minimis for the assessment. So if you make under a certain amount, you are not going to have the assessment on your short-term rental, but the standard is actually like most short-term rentals, almost all short-term rentals are going to fall under the assessment. So what the de minimis is if you're using some kind of facilitator, like a facilitating entity to help you rent out your short-term rental. So if you're on Airbnb, if you're on Vrbo, if you're using a property management company, any of those, you're pretty much automatically, you will have to pay this assessment. If you're not using any facilitating, website or company that helps you rent out your short-term rental, then you do have to make over $100,000 to have this, which is a little high, but pretty much everybody uses a facilitator because it's really hard to rent out your short-term rental without some place to advertise it. And then the last big amendment is, for a while we had a blank in the bill for how much this assessment would be. And so that blank has officially been filled in, and it'll be 15% of the nightly rate on the short-term rental. And so now the bill is going to go to Senate Appropriations and then the floor. This bill has a little bit of a harder hurdle than a lot of our bills because it does require 2/3 vote of the legislature on the floor. So that is a high hurdle, but hopefully we'll be able to get the votes. And I'm happy to talk about how much money, what this revenue stream will look like, which I think is kind of where Dick was going with that question.
Yeah, why don't you, if you have that idea, but also how does this, so the money is collected through a mechanism that's statewide, but then it's given back. How is it given back? How is it distributed?
Yes, so it will be distributed based on where it was collected. So if Santa Barbara County brings in 20% of that money, 20% of the money goes back to Santa Barbara. And so it'll go back to the cities and the counties in the same percentage it was collected.
And what does it seem like the total revenue from that measure would be?
That has been a very complicated question.
Yeah.
Part of the problem has been that we actually don't know how many short-term rentals there are in the state of California. The only people that seem to have that information are the short-term rental people. And they aren't particularly happy with that 15% number. And so they're telling us that it's not going to be that much, they're telling us that this is going to take the whole short-term rentals out of the market because they won't be able to compete with hotels and they aren't going to be able to make money. And this really isn't going to raise that much because they don't make that much. We haven't seen the evidence for that. I think it was one of the committees and various other people have estimated that it could be 400 million, but we have no way of confirming that number without knowing more about how many short-term rentals there are in California and how they're priced, which has just been difficult to get.
So it
It wouldn't be, oh,
Let me
I
just
just,
finish this. Let me
okay.
just finish this and then we'll open up. Because I want to get clarity on the whole thing. It's still a little bit blurry. So first of all, this is a kind of wonky point, but the hotel tax is usually around 15%, the TOT. Does this short-term rental places, don't they have to pay that TOT, or how does this relate to the TOT?
Yeah, so it is completely separate and on top of the TOT.
On top of the TOT.
On top of the TOT. So short-term rentals in Santa Barbara County do have to pay TOT. But they do not have to pay TOT in all areas of California. It's kind of a patchwork system. And it's up to the localities to determine whether or not they want to do a TOT. And I'm also not saying like the percentage of our bill could change since we're still pretty early in the process. But we wanted to start with a strong number.
And so if you, the understanding I'm getting from this about the distribution is that sort of formula, and each entity that within a, depending on their revenue from this, we get back a proportionate amount of the total revenue. And then they are expected to somehow invest that or provide it for affordable housing, or do they have to apply for this money somehow or prove, what do they have to demonstrate in order to get the money back?
Yeah, so it wouldn't be like a grant program. It would be given back to that jurisdiction for affordable housing. This is a specific program where, you know, the housing that's built with this has to be kind of what's being deemed like social housing,
Yeah.
which is, affordable but mixed income. And it would have to be built by unionized labor. And so those are kind of, if there is building, those are kind of the guardrails around it right now. But we also have amounts in the bill that, like, you know, we want this money to be able to be used for like upkeep on these buildings and kind of running them into perpetuity, because that's always being that's always a problem for government run anything, is the maintenance costs. And it'll be maintenance for newly built and existing.
So do you think it could be used to create a community land trust for housing? So you have a particular existing building and it could be taken over by a land trust and run in perpetuity that way? Is that a feature of the bill, or would that be compatible with the bill?
Yeah, like, I don't know if the full amount can be used for that, but definitely the money could be used to do that. Okay. Yeah, I mean, like, obviously we do want some new built, but buying existing housing is not precluded from the bill.
And so finally, and then I'll shut up, what would, if we're interested in supporting the bill, what's the best thing we can do for that?
Yeah, so the best thing to do might be to send in a letter of support, and I can give instructions on how to do that. We do like, there's a portal online, and then it'll get kind of officially recognized in the record of who supports this bill. So if your organizations are interested, you will be listed as like official supporters. And I can, we do have sample support letters, and I do have instructions on how to use the portal if people are interested.
Excellent. So give us that information. Sorry, Nadia, go ahead.
Oh, yeah, I mean, I was just gonna say, if what comes out of this bill, like the STR companies are saying, like, is that short-term rentals go out of business, like that's not the worst thing in the world to us, right? As affordable housing advocates, especially in Santa Barbara. So. But yeah, does anyone else have any questions? Linda.
Well, I could just read what I put in the chat.
Okay.
Samantha.
Just reading it, so that would be helpful, yeah.
Go ahead.
Okay. So let me see. So, okay. I do think, so the limit for the like the de minimis, it isn't so much about the taxable income, but it's how much you make off of the short-term rental.
Oh,
So you would have to make $100,000 on that short-term rental
a year.
a year. But that's very high. But that's only for people like the committee put this amendment in and it wasn't really our amendment, but that's only for unfacilitated rentals. So it's only if you're doing it on your own. So it doesn't include, so all Airbnbs, all Verbos, all people that are doing this through realtors or management companies or any of the online thing, they are automatically included because they're facilitated rentals. I think the committee was trying to get around the idea of like, I rent my house to my second cousin for a summer and, you know, like kind of that issue. But it should cover everybody that actually does this as a business.
Samantha, how is this enforced? I mean, how do we, it's a problem, isn't it? That we really don't have a great way of knowing who's doing this.
Yeah.
So in the city, in the discussion in Santa Barbara about enforcement, the idea it became, let's require permitting, but and then let's make agreements with Airbnb and so on, that they will only list people who have permits. And that would be a nice way to get to really know who's in the business. But now we're giving them an incentive not to be known. So I don't know if that's been a topic of discussion, but I wonder what you're thinking about that.
Yeah, I mean, we've definitely talked about it a little bit, and I think we're going to have some further conversations about it. You know, one thing that's been brought up is it's been hard to figure out exactly how to do that and whether we do that through like tax evasion,
Right.
you know, like structures or kind of what structure to put them into. But, you know, sometimes it can be hard, you know, people can go under the radar with tax evasion for a long time. And so we're trying to figure out what category to kind of put this in for enforcement. We've talked about the permitting and the tax evasion side, and those are kind of what we're going back and forth between right now. But you might need both. We're talking about different options for enforcement.
Learning about the legislature, talking to staff, connecting with people, like that's pretty much all.
And then what about my question?
Yes. Thank you, Linda. I was coming back to that. So currently the funds that are collected would go. Yeah, I'll have to double check the language, but I believe as it's written right now, they go back to the locality where it was collected, whether that was the city or the county.
Pretty much, you're going along with the cycle, and there's no way.
Okay, great. Any other questions for Samantha or Catherine or Benjamin? I know you're here as well. If you have anything else you want to add. If not, I guess we have 3 minutes left if anyone wants to share any other updates with the group. Thank you so much, Samantha, for that. And we I think SBCAN would be happy to submit one of those letters of support. So I'm sure I'll get in touch. Yeah, we can get in touch offline to figure that out. And if other people are interested, maybe, I don't know if you've already put your email in the chat for people.
I'll put it in right now.
Okay,
And I'm
great.
also like, I don't know if it would make sense for me to send that all to you, Nadia, and then you like disperse the letter of support and the instructions. I'm totally flexible for how we should do it.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, people can reach out to me and I can forward that along. Great. So
Thank you, guys.
any other updates? Brief updates from participants, anything that you want folks to know about? We have our North County Awards Dinner coming up, June 25th. It's a Sunday. We'll be at Blosser Urban Garden again, and tickets will be on sale probably next week, and the sponsorship is available. So if you or your organization is interested in sponsoring, we'd love to have you, and we'll be sending more information about that and the tickets and everything shortly. But yeah, put it on your calendar if you haven't already. We'd love to see you there. Great. And if that is all, then we can wrap it up.
Thank you, Nadia.
All right. Bye, everyone. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Thank
Take care.
you.
Bye.
Don't